For our Women's History Month show this year, we're taking a look at Church Women United. It's not the organization you think it is. Stay with us for Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life. A series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
We're glad you joined us today on Austin Faith Dialogue. I'm Sandy Wilder, your host, and as we celebrate Women's History Month, we're going to take a look at Church Women United. Many of us might think it's little old ladies in tennis shoes, but it's not. It's a powerful national organization, and here to talk with us about Church Women United is Betty Kraft, former state president, and also 8 years, right, on the national board of Church Women United.
Yes.
Well, Betty, it's a treat to have you here, and we've got a lot to cover, so we've got a lot actually written out this time. As we start, let me not assume that people necessarily know what Church Women United is, so perhaps you could tell us a little bit just about the organization.
Well, we're an ecumenical Christian women's organization. We have about 500,000 women, and we're in 27 Protestant and Orthodox denominations, and we are a movement, and we promote prayer, advocacy, Bible study, and action.
Sounds like a pretty involving and comprehensive program. So how did this amazing movement get started? Maybe you can say something about the when and the where.
Yes, just a few days after we entered World War II in 1941, when we were attacked at Pearl Harbor, there was a movement throughout the country of women who wanted to make a viable witness. We wanted for our faith in peace and work for peace and justice. And so we started Church Women United.
So it's 60 years old then, and still trying to make a viable and visible witness in society. So exactly how does that happen?
Well, Sandy, in one word, it's clout. That's what our visible witness is. Because whenever you have 500,000 women getting together, dedicated to a cause, people pay attention, things happen.
There is a lot of power in that collective voice, isn't there? And I believe we have some video to show from one of the recent National Assemblies, right, that talks about the history of the organization.
We surely do. The racist organizations in this country have been the recipient of our clout that we've been able to do, because in 1950s and 60s, we realized that we needed to address the racism issue, and our national board decided that we would not meet in segregated facilities unless it was to make a statement against that. And of course, Sandy, as you know, at that time, in some parts of our country, it was against the law for blacks and whites to meet together or live together. So in those instances, when we did that, we were breaking laws. And we knew we were breaking laws, but we felt that those laws were unjust. And we thought, if it's a sin to break an unjust law, then that sin and that law needs to be named intentionally so we can do something about this structure.
So the women then really had the courage of their convictions, even back then, when society was saying, don't talk about this, don't work on this issue. So perhaps this then is the time for us to take a look at the video and refresh our minds on the history.
I'd like you to see it.
1941.
The war had just started. Note the date, December 13th, and war had just been declared, and here was a resolution, and look what we said. Finally, to dedicate ourselves to the task of demanding our country that it assume its full responsibility in the days to come in helping to build a world order based on love and justice, without which there can be no durable peace. How's that for a beginning? But here's one of our big things. From the beginning, racial justice was sought, assignment race And beginning with the school desegregation, we had already started working on it.
And I think this is one of the things, Claire, that CW is best remembered for, is this assignment race, and what a difference it made for so many communities. That's what people tell me when I go around, is what a difference it made for black and white women to worship together, to meet in each other's homes, and in many ways breaking the law in those days.
That's right, they were, absolutely.
And they were real pioneers.
Yeah, that's right. And of course we were involved in the women's movement. We did some very important things. We had this particular meeting in 1972 when so many of the women who are the feminist theologians of our time writing all the books were present for that, along with lay women, CW women. And we had this kind of an explosion when everything kind of came together, you know. And of course we supported the ERA. We were right there. And WICS. WICS was very important. Women in Community Service. And you know about that.
That's
because
right.
we're still doing it.
That's right. It's really made a difference in women's lives who could get into the Job Corps because of the WIC support.
That's right. And then finally, you know, the past has been very important, but the future belongs to the children. And we have to really be aware of that. And all these wonderful things that children have dreamed about. A better world, all the ways they want a better world.
And that's really the challenge for Church Women United at this assembly, is to looking at something working to protect the earth, and the fact that we're going to have a major Freedom Track workshop on the environment as a justice issue, and dreaming for a better world, and looking at where do we go in a post-Cold War.
And
the
peace
whole
all
world.
around.
Peace all around. And
You know, I hear such conviction in those voices of the women talking about Church Women United's history, and I'm struck by their passion. Where does that passion, that conviction to be involved in such radical activities come from?
Well, Sandy, how could readers of the Bible and believers do otherwise? You see, we're compelled to do that because the Scripture compels us to do it. Justice is a bright thread, and it goes all the way through the Scripture. And Isaiah talked about sacrifice, justice, and when Jesus came, of course, he always had a bias toward the poor and the needy. And he talked about justice too. And then the Epistle of James says, faith without works is dead.
So when we go back to the Scriptures, we are compelled to act.
Yes.
Well, the video talked then about action on the whole issue of racism in society. I wonder what some of the other activities that Church Women United has been involved in are.
Well, I want to backtrack a little bit on the racism, because we did go out in teams, biracial teams, black and white, to try to find out about housing in those days in the 50s and 60s. And we would rent an apartment, and then we would test the landlord to see if the landlord was as welcoming to the black ladies as he was to the white ladies. And of course, we did uncover discrimination. We were able to confront it and sometimes to make changes, and we've been proud of that. And too, in 1968, when Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered, it was the Church Women United unit in that city that helped to prevent violence in the streets, and we're proud of that. We also have garnered some national attention with an article in the Wall Street Journal that said, Mr. Muscle meets the church lady.
This sounds like it was not quite a favorable article. Tell us about that.
Well, that was the time that we were sued for $4 million. The Freenor Corporation, who is a major supplier of fish products to the Long John Silver chain, among others, thought that we were defaming them. And this is what had happened. Church Women United had signed on with about 18 other church groups and organizations in a letter writing campaign, because the Freenor Corporation were instituting much harder requirements for older workers in the way of physical labor, and thereby they were causing the workers not to be able to continue with their jobs, and we thought that this was wrong. So instead of suing anybody else on the list, they singled us out to sue for $4 million. Now, I was a member of the board at that time. So as a member of the board, I was a director in the Church Women United Corporation. So I was being sued also. And I well remember that morning in January when the call came through telling me that we were being sued and I was being sued. And I remember thinking, so this is how it is. So be it. And if they thought that because we were little ladies, we were going to back down and apologize, they were very wrong. Because our members immediately went out in the dead of winter with leaflets in front of all the Long John Silver restaurants across the country and started passing them out. And miraculously, they dropped the suit.
There's something about that image of suing church women, people's sisters and mothers and grandmothers, that makes for bad publicity. I think you're right. Well,
Yes.
I'm glad you're telling the stories. People need to know about the power and the witness of Church Women United. So where else has the organization been involved?
Well, in governmental issues also, from the early days, we've had a fair amount of support from women who wanted to make changes for justice in government. Eleanor Roosevelt was one of our earliest supporters. She was really behind Church Women United. And of course, Coretta King, Scott King, is an active member of Church Women United, has served on our boards. And the First Lady, Hillary Rodham Clinton, actually accepted an invitation for us in 1993 for an hour-long telecast on the healthcare issues, because she knew that it would be important to let the women know her stand, as she was trying to make some changes at that time. But we have been involved in other ways too. We had two key legislators, Republican Congresswoman Constance Morelia and also Democratic Senator Patty Murray. They received Church Women United's Valiant Award recently from us.
And that's the highest award in the
Yes,
organization,
that
correct?
is, and that is the pen that I'm wearing now. If you'd like to see it, that's the Valiant Woman's pen. We have advocated for peace during war times, during the Vietnam era and the Desert Storm era also. And once in the late 80s, we even had a campaign to make peace ribbons, and everybody around the country made their little segment, and we sewed them together, and the women took them and wrapped them around the Capitol. And that was one of our most visible witnesses for peace that we have made.
It is really amazing the power of ordinary folks when they work together. And
Yes.
when we come back here after the break, we're going to talk some more about Church Women United and its 60-year-old witness now.
Right.
So thank you, Betty.
Okay.
And thank you for being here on Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll be right back. We're glad you're here with us on Austin Faith Dialogue, when to celebrate Women's History Month, we're talking about that organization, Church Women United, that we're hearing a lot of stories about. And our guest is Betty Kraft, former state president and former member of the National Board of Church Women United. Well, Betty, we had talked in the first half about the program of the organization. It's a pretty extensive array of work. Say a little bit about how this work is funded.
All right. Sandy, I'm glad you asked about that. Church Women United has 3 celebrations each year, and the money from the offering at World Day of Prayer goes to fund projects in the country that writes that celebration. A different country writes the celebration each year. The women from Indonesia wrote this year's World Day of Prayer service that we just held earlier in the month. And so we will be funding some of their projects this year in the amount of $28,800. Last year, the ladies from Venezuela wrote the World Day of Prayer service. And it was my pleasure as a chairman of the Grants Committee to personally oversee this and to fund 2 projects in Venezuela, a children's hospital and a home for handicapped children. We also do funding for national projects. I can tell you about 2 or 3 of them quickly. We funded a project in Florida for farm worker youth. You see, the migrant youth are behind and don't always graduate with their class for obvious reasons because they can't attend as many classes, so they need some special peer tutors, and we provided that for them. Also, a literacy center for immigrant women in Chicago. You have to know the language to get along. And then also, too, a project that we had in West Virginia that is trying to help families with violent history, family history, work toward a non-violent family history. And this is not only for the battered women, but it's educationally also. That's just to name 2 or 3.
Probably just to hit the highlights. I'm sure there's a lot more. And here in a little bit, I want us to get to talking about what's happening locally, particularly taking a look at some of the work that the organization is doing with parents and their children, and look at a video clip. But before we get to that, maybe you can say a little something about where Church Women United hasn't quite gotten to where it wants to be. So far, the history sounds wonderful. A lot has happened. A lot of money has been raised and spent. But surely there have been disappointments over the years, too.
Oh, there have been and still are. But we're moving forward. Of course, we're disappointed that we still have racism and injustice and prejudice in our country and across the world. This is very disappointing to us. And we were disappointed that the health care reform did not take the place of legislation so that people could have what we felt was their right to health care. We were disappointed with welfare reform. We were disappointed when legal immigrants couldn't get food stamps. That's disappointing. But all those things come together and make us sure that there is a reason that we need good women and very strong women to continue in our ever-growing cause for that wonderful, beloved community, that just community that we know we're going to have.
Strong, committed women need apply. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's going on here locally, because probably many people watching would not get involved in some of the national issues, but talk a little bit about what's happening here in the Austin area that people can jump in on.
Well, in the state of Texas and in the Austin unit, we are promoting the nurturing of children, small children especially. We have plugged into a program called Parents as Teachers that is in 48 states and 7 different countries, so it's really a proven program. But it emphasizes the training in the very early years that the parents can give, and many of these parents, you see, are teenage parents. 81% of the ones we're working with are teenage parents. 8% of the mothers are 14 and younger. So they don't know how to be parents. They need help learning how to be parents, and this is important.
So what the organization is trying to do is give some of those basic skills.
Yes.
And something as simple as interaction between mother and child, which I believe we've got a video clip of to illustrate just how simple some of these skills are, correct?
Right, and I'd like you to see it.
Well, it'll be up in just a minute. In the meantime, how is that project funded?
Well, we are, of course, it costs $800 or just less than $800 per year per family to be involved in it, if one wants to do that. People can give money toward it or they can give volunteer hours. You can go and be trained to be a volunteer in the home. Sometimes they meet in schools and other sites, but there are all kinds of, it's very flexible. In other words, if you have an interest in this program, we can find a way for you to help with it.
And surely, as we all know, an investment in basic skills pays off during an entire lifetime. It's money well spent.
Yes, it is.
I think the video is ready now, so
Good.
let's take a
All
look
right.
at it.
In the face-to-face paradigm, you have an infant, in this case around 3 or 4 months of age, and a parent who's looking directly into the face of the child.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star.
The mother is responding with her voice, with her face, with eye contact to the baby's responses. Now, if you watch how the baby locks into the mother's face right there, and then will respond with an arousal that's exactly proportional to what the mother's doing.
Sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little.
Now, when we ask the mother to have a blank expression, watch how the baby's behavior becomes disorganized. Her arms move, she pulls things, tries to get herself calmed, but it doesn't work. This lack of response disconnects her from the infant. Now, notice that when the mother begins to express herself in response to the baby, there's a reconnection that occurs. And you can see this kind of circle of communication that occurs, a kind of dance of attunement. And these attunements that happen are extremely important for the development of the brain.
Moments like these between parent and child do so much for a baby.
Well, you know, if you hold a small baby, a newborn baby, and hold him right and then start talking to him, you'll see his eyes widen, his whole face will soften.
Can you do that with your tongue?
I imagine many of us hadn't even thought about how basic some of those skills are and what a difference they make in a child's life. But speaking of making a difference, Betty, talk a little bit about why you got involved in this organization that does make a difference. There's a lot of things you could invest your time in. Why Church Women United?
Well, Sandy, I have been a dedicated member of United Methodist Women since I was about 20 years old, which is getting to be a long time ago now. And I found out early on from a brochure from the Women's Division that if I was a United Methodist woman, I was also in Church Women United. I guess they just sign us up at birth. I don't know. Every denomination doesn't take quite that stance on it, but the United Methodist Women does. So I had that history for it in my mind and promoted it as a district president for UMW, but there wasn't a Church Women United organization where I was. There happened to be one that was had been in existence for a long time called Tyler Council of Church Women that involved the Jewish ladies also. So I was president of that 3 years. And I guess it was preparing me for being in Church Women United. And then when I moved to Central Texas, to Austin, I saw a notice about Church Women United, and I went to the meeting. And I was so interested in it, and they signed me up almost immediately to be Celebrations Chair, and from that I went on to be an area chair in various state offices and then state president. But I really enjoy working with women from other denominations.
There is some richness
It
in
is.
getting together in
Yes.
that way, isn't there?
Yes, there really is, and learning their ways, and they're learning yours, and then all of our working together. It's just a blessing. It really is, that you can't find just within your own denomination.
And now, as state president, you had an opportunity for a couple of years to help shape the state organization. What would you point to as something you're particularly able to do in that role?
Well, Sandy, I had as my theme, every president needed to have a theme to go in the yearbook. So I selected as mine, Just a Sister Away, which is, of course, Renita Welms, the title of her book. And it was my aim to try to promote more inclusiveness in our state board and all across the state in Church Women United, from Hispanics and black women and any other minorities that there might be. And we had different Bible studies back and forth between black and white churches and so forth, and it was just a richness. if I am to be remembered as state president in any way, I want to be remembered as just a sister away. And I always sign my correspondence during those 2 years, just a sister away.
And I see some parallels in your state service and how you got interested in the organization as a way to cross some boundaries.
Oh, yes.
With your sisters in the faith. So let's hope that lots of people have listened to the history of Church Women United and said, that's for me. Where do they go now? How do they find out more information about the organization?
Well, of course, we have a web page, but also you can email me or give me a call, and I'll be glad to talk to you probably more than you want to know about Church Women United, just anytime.
And I assume that there are also print resources, audio-visual
Yes.
resources that one
Many
can
of
get?
them. Austin has a very active unit of Church Women United. And there's also one in northern Austin called Western Hills that encompass that geographical area. So we're all over the place, and if you will just contact me, I will get you in the right direction.
Any particular kind of woman that Church Women United here locally is looking for?
We're looking for every woman.
So every woman who is a member of a Protestant church in the Central Texas area is welcome to come, correct?
Yes, yes.
Are there any particular age restrictions?
No, of course, you know, one of our challenges as a 60-year-old movement is attracting younger women. So if you're younger, we'd like to have you. If you're middle-aged, we'd like to have you. If you're older and recently retired, this is another target group for us. We find recently retired women, professional women, very skilled, time on their hands. We'll give you something to do.
Lots of opportunities for service. So we
Yes.
have maybe a minute left. What would you say, looking 5 years down the road, like to see this Church Women United chapter here in this area look like? What would it be doing?
Well, we have done a lot in this area. We have our celebrations. We go to the Del Valley Correctional Unit to do all of our celebrations. I know when I worked in celebrations, we had children's services at one of the Catholic schools. I'd like to see that continue, to bring the children in, because it is very, very important for them to learn to celebrate with other denominations and not just their own. And I'd like for us to keep pushing those barriers away, for this unit to keep pushing the barriers away so that we could have really a more colorful rainbow, that when we attended our celebrations, we would have a great multiplicity, you know, of ethnic origin.
So there's still work to do and
A
still
lot of work
places.
to do.
Thank you, Betty, for sharing the stories. And we thank you for joining us this week on Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll see you here again next week.